Nobody thought anyone was watching, but what Padre Pio witnessed that night was one of the deepest mysteries of the spiritual world. Alone in the monastery chapel, praying in the silence, he felt a shift in the air, not cold, but breathtaking in its weight. When Padre Pio lifted his head, he saw a presence standing before him. A man, middle-aged, wearing worn clothing, his eyes filled with deep fear and helplessness. The man stood frozen, his body trembling as though standing on the edge of an abyss. His lips moved without sound. His hands reached forward as if grasping for something invisible. Padre Pio felt an immediate weight in his chest, the kind of spiritual pressure that came only when heaven was about to reveal something profound. "What troubles you?" Padre Pio asked gently. The man's voice finally broke through, not as sound but as a cry that pierced directly into Padre Pio's spirit. "I called upon you," the man whispered. "In my final moment, when everything collapsed around me, when fear consumed me completely, I spoke your name. And now I'm here. But I don't understand why." Padre Pio stepped closer. The man carried marks of recent death, not visible wounds but a spiritual signature that showed his earthly life had just ended. "Tell me what happened," Padre Pio said. "From the beginning." The man's form flickered slightly. "I was never devout," he began, his voice cracking. "I went to church as a child, but I stopped. Life got busy, faith felt distant, prayers seemed pointless. I built a life without God, or so I thought. I ignored every call, every whisper, every moment when something inside me said to return." Padre Pio listened without judgment, recognizing the pattern he had seen in countless souls. "Years passed," the man continued. "I told myself I was fine. I told myself I didn't need religion, but there was always something missing. A hollow space I tried to fill with everything except the one thing that could actually fill it." His voice broke. "And then last night, everything changed. But what happened next was the most shocking part." The man described his final moments with painful clarity. He had been alone when a sudden, crushing pain seized his chest. He collapsed, gasping, unable to reach the phone. Terror flooded him, not just fear of death but something deeper. In that moment, memories he had suppressed for decades erupted. His grandmother praying the rosary, the smell of incense in church, stories of saints he had dismissed. And then, inexplicably, a name rose from the depths of his consciousness. "Padre Pio." "I don't even know why," the man said, trembling. "I hadn't thought about you in 40 years. But in that moment of absolute terror, when I felt my life slipping away, your name came to my lips. I whispered it. Once. Just once. 'Padre Pio, help me.' And then everything went dark." Padre Pio felt his heart constrict. He had heard countless stories of deathbed conversions, of souls crying out in their final breath. But this was different. This soul hadn't called upon Christ directly. He had simply spoken the name of a saint, a desperate grasp at something he barely remembered. "And now you're here," Padre Pio said softly. The man nodded, confusion etched across his spiritual form. "But why? I didn't deserve mercy. I abandoned faith. I lived selfishly. I hurt people. Why would heaven respond to someone like me?" Right at this moment, everything changed. Padre Pio raised his hand slowly, and as he did, the chapel around them transformed. The stone walls faded, replaced by something far more revealing. The spiritual realm opened before them like a curtain being pulled back. Heaven revealed the moment of the man's death in perfect, devastating detail. Padre Pio watched as the man's body lay on the floor, life draining from it. But above the dying body, something else was happening. The moment the man whispered, "Padre Pio, help me," a light appeared. Not bright, not overwhelming, but present. Small at first, like a single candle lit in enormous darkness. But it was enough. Padre Pio saw himself appear in the spiritual realm, drawn by the man's cry. He watched as his own spiritual form approached the dying soul with immediate compassion. But he wasn't alone. Behind him came angels, descending rapidly. And behind them, radiating warmth that made even Padre Pio tremble, came a maternal presence he recognized instantly. "Mary." The man stared at the vision, unable to comprehend. "I called your name once," he whispered. "Just once. How did that bring all of this?" Padre Pio turned to him. "You called upon a saint in your moment of greatest need," he said. "And in doing so, you opened a door you thought had been closed forever. Your cry was not magic. It was a desperate desire for help, for mercy, for something beyond yourself. And heaven never ignores such a cry. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what comes next." The vision continued. Padre Pio watched as the angel surrounded the dying man's soul the instant it separated from the body. Demons had been waiting, hovering at a distance, expecting an easy claim. This was a soul that had lived without faith, without sacraments, without repentance. But the moment Padre Pio's presence arrived with the angels, the demons recoiled violently. The man's single cry had activated a protection he didn't even know existed. Mary's presence drew closer to the soul, not with words but with an embrace that steadied the terrified spirit. Padre Pio saw the man's soul trembling, confused, overwhelmed. But he was not alone. He was surrounded by heaven's response. "But I didn't pray properly," the man said, his voice filled with anguish. "I didn't confess. I didn't repent. I didn't even fully believe. How can this be mercy?" Padre Pio answered with a truth that burned in his own heart. Mercy is not earned. It is given. Your cry was imperfect, but it was sincere. You reached out in your moment of greatest fear, and heaven rushed to meet you. God responds to desire, not to perfection. The man fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of undeserved grace. "What happens to me now?" Padre Pio looked at him with deep compassion. "Now, you must choose. Heaven has answered your cry, but your soul is wounded. You lived a life without love, without humility, without surrender. These wounds must be healed before you can enter God's presence fully. Purgatory awaits you, not as punishment but as purification. You will suffer, but you will not be abandoned." The man wept, not from despair but from relief. "I thought I was lost forever." "You were never beyond mercy," Padre Pio said. "Not as long as you could still cry out." "Hold on, don't miss this detail." The vision shifted again, and heaven revealed something even more profound. Padre Pio saw the man's entire life unfold before them, but not in condemnation. Every moment of grace he had received, every whisper of conscience he had ignored, every call to return he had suppressed. They were all still there, preserved in the spiritual realm like seeds waiting to bloom. His grandmother's prayers had never disappeared. They had simply waited, dormant but alive, for the moment when he would finally reach out. "All of this was waiting for you," Padre Pio said. "God never abandoned you. He simply waited for you to turn, even at the last possible second." The man stared in disbelief. "But I rejected all of this. I walked away from everything. And yet you returned with a single word," Padre Pio answered. "That is the mystery of mercy. A lifetime of rejection can be undone by one moment of sincere desire." The angels began to move closer, preparing to guide the soul to its next stage. The man looked at Padre Pio with gratitude mixed with sorrow. "Will I see you again?" Padre Pio smiled gently. "I will pray for you. And when your purification is complete, we will meet again in the light." As the angels lifted the man's soul, Padre Pio watched him disappear into a realm of healing fire, painful but redemptive. The vision faded, and the chapel returned to normal. But Padre Pio remained on his knees, trembling from what he had witnessed. He had seen the power of a single desperate prayer. He had seen mercy respond to the faintest cry. Everyone thought they knew the truth, but the real shock was just beginning. The following night, Padre Pio found himself unable to sleep. The vision of the desperate man haunted him with wonder. He returned to the chapel, seeking understanding, and heaven granted him something even more revealing. This time, he would see not just one soul's salvation, but the spiritual mechanics of how a single cry reaches heaven. The vision began with vast darkness, representing the spiritual state of a soul far from God. Padre Pio watched as this soul lived day after day in spiritual numbness, unaware of the danger, unaware of the love waiting. Then came the moment of crisis. The soul faced death suddenly, unexpectedly. Terror gripped it, and in that terror, something inside broke open. The soul didn't know how to pray. It hadn't prayed in decades. It didn't remember formal prayers. But it cried out instinctively, desperately. "Padre Pio, help me." 3 words. That was all. You won't believe what happened next. The moment those words left the soul, Padre Pio watched the spiritual realm erupt with activity. His own spiritual presence was drawn immediately to the cry, not by his own will but by heaven's design. Saints are given the grace to respond to those who call upon them, especially in moments of desperation. But he wasn't alone. The moment he appeared, Mary came. She always comes when a soul cries out in genuine need, even imperfectly. Angels descended in formation, not to judge but to protect. They created a barrier around the soul, preventing the demonic forces from getting closer. The demons raged, furious that their claim was being challenged. This soul lived without faith, they screamed. This soul rejected grace for decades. It belongs to us. But heaven's response was swift and absolute. A voice, not audible but undeniable, filled the spiritual atmosphere. The soul cried out. Mercy answers every cry. Padre Pio watched as the demons were forced back by the sheer presence of grace. The soul, still confused, still terrified, was lifted gently by the angels and brought before a light that was both comforting and revealing. This was the moment of particular judgment. The soul expected condemnation. Its entire life flashed before it, wasted years, ignored graces, broken relationships, sins unconfessed. Guilt crashed over the soul like a wave. "I don't deserve mercy," it whispered. And then Mary spoke, not with words but with a presence that communicated directly to the soul's heart. "Mercy is not about what you deserve. It is about what you desire. You desired help. You cried out. Heaven heard you." The soul trembled. "But I didn't even fully believe when I called out. It was just desperation." Mary's response would echo in Padre Pio's heart forever. Desperation is often the beginning of faith. You reached beyond yourself. That is enough for mercy to enter. You haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. The vision expanded, and Padre Pio saw something that shocked him even more. He saw countless other souls, all across the world, all across time, crying out in their final moments. Some called upon Jesus. Some called upon Mary. Some called upon saints they barely remembered. And every single time, heaven responded. Not with judgment, not with rejection, but with immediate, tender mercy. He saw a woman who had lived in sin for decades call out, "Mother Mary," with her dying breath. Mary appeared instantly, wrapping the woman's soul in maternal protection, guiding her toward purification instead of damnation. He saw a man who had been an atheist his entire life, who in the terror of a sudden heart attack, screamed, "God, if you're real, help me." That desperate plea, filled with doubt but also with genuine desire, was answered immediately. Angels descended. Christ's presence drew near. The man's soul was saved, not because of his perfect faith, but because of his honest cry. Padre Pio saw soldiers dying on battlefields, whispering prayers they learned as children. He saw mothers taking their last breaths, calling upon saints they hadn't thought about in years. And in every case, heaven responded. Not always with immediate entry into paradise, but always with salvation. Always with mercy. This is the secret, Padre Pio realized, tears streaming down his face. Heaven waits until the very last possible moment. God never gives up on a soul as long as it can still cry out. But the vision wasn't finished. Heaven showed him the other side, the tragedy that breaks God's heart. Padre Pio saw souls who faced death and remained silent, not because they couldn't cry out, but because pride sealed their lips. They refused to ask for help, even in their final moment, because asking meant admitting they needed something beyond themselves. Padre Pio watched in anguish as angels stood ready, waiting for even the smallest cry, but it never came. Mary waited, yearning to rush to their aid, but they never called her name. Christ stood at the door of their hearts, knocking until the final breath, but they never opened. The choice was theirs. And they chose silence. They chose pride. This is hell, Padre Pio understood with crushing clarity. Not fire, not torture, not divine punishment. Hell is the final refusal to cry out for help. But here's what nobody expected to discover. The vision began to fade, but not before heaven revealed one final truth. Padre Pio saw his own role in this mystery. Every time someone calls upon him in desperation, he is spiritually present to intercede. Not because of his own power, but because saints in heaven are given the grace to participate in the salvation of souls. When someone cries, "Padre Pio, help me," he brings that cry directly to Christ, directly to Mary, directly to the throne of God. This is why the communion of saints matters, Padre Pio realized. We who are in heaven fight for those still on earth, especially in their darkest moments. As the vision finally dissolved, Padre Pio remained in the chapel, his heart burning with a fire that would never leave him. He understood now the power of a single desperate cry. He understood that no soul is beyond mercy as long as it can still call out. He understood that heaven waits, patient and ready, until the very last second. He rose slowly, his body aching from hours of kneeling, but his spirit ablaze with renewed purpose. From that night forward, he told every soul who came to him, "Never believe you are beyond mercy. Even at the edge of death, even after a lifetime of sin, even if your faith is weak and your prayer is desperate, cry out. Call upon Jesus. Call upon Mary. Call upon the saints. Your cry will be heard." Heaven never ignores the desperate. And for the rest of his life, Padre Pio carried this truth like a torch in the darkness. He knew, with absolute certainty, that the moment someone calls upon him in genuine need, he will be there. Not because of his holiness, but because mercy demands it. Not because the person deserves it, but because grace is freely given. Not because the prayer is perfect, but because the desire is real. The greatest truth he ever learned was this: hell is filled with silence. Heaven is filled with cries for mercy. And every single cry, no matter how weak, how late, how imperfect, is answered with the fullness of divine love. This is what Padre Pio saw. This is what changed everything. And this is why, even now, souls across the world whisper his name in their darkest moments, trusting that their desperate cry will pierce through the veil and reach the heart of heaven itself. Because it always does. Every single time.